Hello students. So in this session we are continuing with the antihistaminics. So in the previous session you already had an introduction to the actions of histamine, and you will also learned about the different receptors of histamine and the corresponding location and their action. With that background, we'll start discussing about the antihistaminics. Now, under this class, we are going to look into the classification of antihistaminics, the actions of antihistaminics, the adverse effects of antihistaminics, the therapeutic uses of antihistaminics, and finally, we'll be looking into the second generation antihistaminics, which are a newer class as well as the most important class of antihistaminics. Now, antihistaminics, when we are talking about antihistaminics, we are actually referring to the H1 receptor antagonist. So, you already know that there are four receptor subtypes, that is H1 to H4. But when we say antihistaminics, we are referring to the drugs which are blocking the H1 receptors. The drugs which block the H2 receptor, we prefer to call them as the H2 blockers. We usually uh, refer to antihistaminics as the drugs which block the H1 receptors. So I think that should be clear to all of you. So they are the drugs which competitively antagonize the actions of histamine at the H1 receptors. So already you are aware of the actions of the H1 receptor. So when you are learning about the antihistaminics, you will see all these actions which you had studied under H1 receptors being antagonized. So now we look into the classification of antihistaminics. So broadly, they are classified into first generation antihistaminics and second generation antihistaminics. The first generation antihistaminics were the ones which were present in the market much earlier than the second generation antihistaminics. They have been there in the market since 1931, and they are referred to as the conventional antihistaminics. Now, these are sedative, that is, the first generation ones are sedative, and based on their degree of sedation, they are divided into highly sedative, moderately sedative, and mild sedative. And under each one, you have got different examples. So I'll be just reading out a few examples. So I recommend that you remember at least two examples under each of these categories, and preferably the ones that I have highlighted in blue. You can include that as an examples whenever you are learning these classification, because the ones that I've highlighted are the drugs which are more popularly used in the community, and you will come across these drugs very often in your medical wards, and maybe you would have also used for your personal uses also. So highly sedative first generation antihistaminics, they include mainly diphenhydramine, dimenhydrate, and the important one is promethazine and even hydroxyzine. And the moderately sedative ones include phenyramine maleate, cinnarizine, meclizine, buclizine, cyproheptadine. The mild sedative ones include chlorpheniramine maleate, cyclizine, clemastine, and so on. So you can remember highly sedative one, example promethazine, moderately sedative one, phenyramine, cinnarizine, mild sedative example is chlorpheniramine. Now, the examples of second generation antihistaminics include cetirizine, levocetirizine, fexofenadine, loratadine, desloratadine, azelastine, misolastine, ebastine, ropatadine. So again, you can remember cetirizine and levocetirizine. This is one of the very common drug that you would have heard about even before you have joined this class. You could have maybe used also these drugs like cetirizine and levocetirizine. These are all second generation antihistaminics. Now, let us discuss the pharmacological actions of antihistaminics. So, in short, they block the actions of histamine on H1 receptors. So, we had already discussed the actions of H1 receptors. Now, all those actions would be blocked by the antihistaminics. For example, they will block the histamine induced triple response. I already told you what the triple response was when we had discussed about the actions of histamine. We had discussed when the histamine is injected intradermally, it can produce the triple response of Lewis. And I had already mentioned and described the response to you in the previous session. Now, this will be blocked by the antihistamine. So, whenever there is an insect bite and you get a triple response, the treatment that you give is an antihistamine because it will block the triple response. Similarly, it will block the histamine-induced bronchoconstriction, and also it will block the contraction of intestinal and other smooth muscles which are induced by histamine. Now, when we were discussing about the actions of histamine, I had spent elaborately on the actions of histamine on the BP, the blood pressure. So already I told you that the low doses of histamine, they produce a fall in the BP because of the H1 action. Now, so if you have to block the BP fall caused by low doses of histamine, you can give an antihistamine, that is an H1 receptor blocker. On the other hand, as I already told you in the previous session, if the BP fall is caused by high doses of histamine, you have to give an antihistamine, that is H1 receptor blocker. Along with that, you have to give a H2 blocker only, blocker also, to bring about the normal BP, because the high doses of histamine cause a fall in the BP, not only because of H1 action, but also because of the H2 action. So in order to antagonize also, you need an H1 receptor antagonist, and also you require a H2 blocker. Now, anti-allergic action. So initially itself, I had told you that histamine, it plays a very important role in hypersensitivity reactions and allergic manifestations. So all these antihistaminics, they have an anti-allergic action. That is, they block the manifestation of the hypersensitivity reaction. That is the type 1 hypersensitivity reaction like urticaria, angioedema. These are all this hypersensitivity is mediated by the histamine, and this will be blocked by the antihistaminic. So whenever there is an urticaria because of an insect bite, or because of some medicine that you had, then you can always take an antihistaminic to counteract that allergic manifestation. However, you have to remember that adrenaline is the life-saving drug in angioedema and anaphylactic shock. Antihistaminics are useful, but they are having a slow action and they will take some time to start their action. So we do not have that much time to wait for in the case of an anaphylactic shock, which is a severe form of type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. So we have to give adrenaline, which is a physiological antagonist of histamine, which we have already discussed, I think, in the previous sessions. You have to give adrenaline as a life-saving drug in severe type 1 hypersensitivity reactions like angioedema and anaphylactic shock. You can add on antihistaminics as an further adjuvant role only. However, if you have very minor hypersensitivity reaction, just like an itching or an urticaria, even a single antihistaminic drug would do good. So antihistaminics are also not very useful in bronchial asthma. Okay, so I mentioned to you that antihistaminics can actually revert the bronchoconstriction that is caused. However, in bronchial asthma, one thing that you have to remember is that bronchial asthma is an interplay of different mediators. Histamine causes some amount of bronchoconstriction in bronchial asthma, but the major mediators are leukotrienes and other mediators. Histamine plays a very minor role in the bronchoconstriction that is there in bronchial asthma. So that is why antihistaminics may not be too much useful in the bronchoconstriction that is associated with bronchial asthma. However, if bronchoconstriction is a part of anaphylaxis, that is, it is caused by some other trigger, then you can definitely have antihistaminic. You can add on along with the adrenaline. But bronchoconstriction is caused because of bronchial asthma, then antihistaminics may not be that much useful, because in bronchial asthma, the bronchoconstriction is not just caused by histamine, but the other mediators play a more important role, especially the leukotrienes. Now, the next action is anticholinergic action. Okay, now this anticholinergic action means they have a decrease in the secretions. Now, this is seen only with the first generation antihistaminics. It is not present in the second generation antihistaminics, because the first generation antihistaminics have got an anticholinergic action. When you are giving them to a patient, it will bring down all the secretion, it will dry up all the secretions. So like rhinorrhea, if you give it to a patient with common cold, he will have a decreased rhinorrhea because it can dry up all the secretions. So far we have discussed the actions of antihistaminics, that is, it can antagonize the actions of histamine, it is having anti-allergic action, it has got anticholinergic actions, and it has got some CNS action. Now CNS action is also very much particular to the first generation antihistaminics only. Second generation antihistaminics have very minimal CNS action. So except for the first point that we discussed under the actions, all the others, that is mainly the anticholinergic and the CNS actions, which we are going to discuss now, are present mainly in the first generation antihistaminics. Now let us see what are the CNS actions which are present in the first generation antihistaminics. The first one is sedation. Now, we saw the classification of first generation, and we saw that different drugs can have different levels of sedation, and even in an individual, there can be variation in the amount of sedation that is produced by different drugs. Second generation antihistaminics, they are non-sedating. Okay, that is very important difference between the first generation and second generation. Second generations are have very minimal sedation or almost no sedating effect. Then the first generation antihistaminics, they have the capacity to prevent motion sickness. So all of you, I guess, that know what a motion sickness is. And the first generation antihistaminics, they can prevent the motion sickness. How they do this is they can inhibit the vestibular sensory nuclei in the inner ear, which has a role to play in the motion sickness. So they inhibit the vestibular sensory nuclei in the inner ear and suppress the labyrinthine reflexes by reducing the influx of calcium from endolymph into the vestibular sensory cells. Now, this is a way by which they prevent the motion sickness. So, they are preventing the influx of calcium from the endolymph into the vestibular sensory cells and are inhibiting the vestibular sensory nuclei. They also prevent the morning sickness, but the mechanism is not known. The first generation antihistaminics can also reduce the tremor, rigidity, and cyalloria. Cyalloria is excess salivation, which is seen in case of Parkinsonism. So you already know Parkinsonism patients, they are having a tremors, rigidity, and cyalloria. And these symptoms can be reduced by giving first generation antihistaminics. And this is mainly attributed because of their anticholinergic property and sedative property. So why are the first generation antihistaminics useful to reduce the tremor, rigidity, and cyalloria of Parkinsonism? It is mainly because of their associated anticholinergic and sedative property. Now, the first generation antihistaminics, some of them have got appetite stimulating effect also. So you have seen that the CNS actions are mainly seen with the first generation antihistaminics. The CNS actions are minimal or nil in the case of second generation antihistaminics. Now let us see the adverse drug reactions of antihistaminics. So they produce sedation. The first generation ones, they are producing sedation, diminished alertness, loss of concentration, dizziness and all, and even motor incoordination. This, as I already told you, is mainly seen with the first generation antihistaminics. It is not seen with the second generation antihistaminic. So anytime you are prescribing a first generation antihistaminic like pheniramine or chlorpheniramine to a patient, he should always be advised not to drive a motor vehicle or to operate a machinery. This is because he can fall asleep or he could have a motor incoordination. So he should always be advised to abstain from these activities if he has been prescribed a first generation antihistaminic. Then contact dermatitis can occur on topical use of some first generation antihistaminic, especially when you are applying a cream or an ointment. It can produce contact dermatitis in some individuals. Then, because of the peripheral anticholinergic effects that is seen mainly in the first generation antihistaminics, the patient can experience dryness of mouth, blurred vision, that is mydriasis, constipation, urinary retention. All this is seen because of the anticholinergic action, because of the drying action. So they are having actions which are similar to that of atropine. So already you have learned the anticholinergic actions in the chapter on atropine, and these actions, these side effects can also occur in patients who are taking first generation antihistaminics. Now, after discussing the ADR, we will now see the therapeutic uses of first generation antihistaminics. So the first one, allergic reactions. So any kind of allergic reactions, itching, urticaria, hay fever, allergic conjunctivitis, you can use a antihistaminic. Now, it's a severe type of type 1 hypersensitivity reaction like anaphylactic shock or laryngeal edema. Then I told you the first choice drug is adrenaline, but you can give antihistaminic as an adjuvant to adrenaline. Then, in the conditions which are involving histamine release, for example, an insect bite, or sometimes when you give a saline or a blood transfusion to a patient, there can be histamine release, which can lead to rigor in the patient. In those conditions, also, you can give an antihistaminic. This is the reason why, whenever a patient is undergoing a blood transfusion or a normal saline or any kind of IV fluid transfusion, infusion, then you'll always see in the orders that an antihistamine has been prescribed. That means they will write that if the patient is developing some manifestation of an allergic condition, allergy, you have to give a injection of a antihistaminic. And usually the antihistaminic prescribed is a pheniramine maleate, pheniramine. That is usually given along the orders of a patient who is put on a transfusion of blood. Then in the case of pruritus, that is a very chronic kind of itching thing. In that also you can have an antihistaminic. So some people complain of itching, and then it could be idiopathic reasons also you can have. And this is and the reason that is attributed is release of histamine and their stimulation of H1 receptors on the afferent neurons. Because of that, they are experiencing this itching sensation, and in those individuals also you can give an antihistaminic and it will provide much relief. Now, in case of common cold, so whenever you have a cold, you would be seeing that the doctors prescribe an antihistaminic. This is because one thing is that there could be an allergic component, so it can overcome that. And also you might be having this watering eyes or rhinorrhea. So all those will be overcome by a first generation antihistaminic. So when you are in the case of a common cold, when you are having a lot of rhinorrhea and all, it's always better to give a first generation antihistaminic because it can dry the secretion because of its anticholinergic effect. However, the second generation antihistaminics may not be that useful in common cold associated with excessive secretion, because SGAs, second generation antihistaminics, they do not have anticholinergic action. Then they are also useful in motion sickness. When I was discussing about the CNS action, I had mentioned that they can be useful for motion sickness, vertigo, morning sickness, and other forms of vomiting also. And you can see the drugs of first generation ones which are commonly used for motion sickness is promethazine. Even meclizine can be used. Then for vertigo, you have cinnarizine being frequently used. For morning sickness, again, you can see promethazine being used. Now, other antihistaminics can also be used, but these are the ones which are having more of the CNS actions, and that is why they are made use in such conditions. So, promethazine you can remember for motion sickness and for morning sickness, and cinnarizine you can remember for a patient who is having vertigo. Then even antihistamines have been used as appetite stimulant. Now, this is not a very one use which is not to be encouraged. And one of the antihistaminic which was actually found in all these appetite stimulant cuffs, appetite stimulant syrups, was cyproheptadine, and it was used in children, especially the underweight children who were not having a good appetite. And it was actually prescribed for many children in the previous years. However, such type of use is now considered as inappropriate because the cyproheptadine can cause CNS depression in children and can affect their learning. So this use is not advocated nowadays. Then the CNS, this first generation antihistaminics can also be used as pre-anesthetic medication to decrease the secretions before the giving anesthesia. And the one that is made use is promethazine. And it can also give some sedative action also. So you already know that while a patient goes in for a surgery, it's always better to sedate him and also to decrease the secretion so that he doesn't have any aspiration. Okay, so all these things you will learn further when you are discussing about general anesthetics and pre-anesthetic medication. But since an antihistaminic is being used, we are mentioning it here. Then even for cough, you can have first generation antihistaminics like chlorpheniramine, promethazine and all. So you have lots of cough syrups like one of the cough syrups you would have heard is Finargan. It's a brand name that is available in the market. It's Finargan cough syrup, Benadryl cough syrup. So these are having promethazine as an antihistaminic in those. So if you ever have happen to see a Finargan cough syrup in your house, you can just turn back and see what it contains. So you'll see that it contains an antihistaminic that is promethazine. Now, Parkinsonism, I already told you that it can provide relief from tremors and all, and rigidity and all, because of its anticholinergic and sedative properties. So you can see again, promethazine is being used for this use. So you can see that promethazine, chlorpheniramine, pheniramine, all these are the most commonly used first generation antihistaminics. Similarly, there are some drugs which can cause muscle dystonias, and these also can be relieved by promethazine. Okay, so again, when further in your syllabus, you will be learning about drugs which can cause muscle dystonias. At that point, how to overcome the muscle dystonias is by prescribing them with a promethazine injection or oral or cup syrup. Then some of the first generation antihistaminics can also be used as a sedative, hypnotic, and also as an anxiolytic. Again, promethazine finds a use for these purposes. Now, these are just examples of the first generation antihistaminics, which are finding more popular uses. So you can see pheniramine maleate. So this tablet, this company brand Avil is very familiar to all of us. So I'm quite sure all of us would have used this tablet sometime in our life. So Avil, it is actually containing pheniramine maleate. That is the first generation antihistaminic, available as 25 milligram tablets. And you can see this is a chlorpheniramine maleate tablet. It is available at 4 mg tablets. Then you can see Finargan available as 25 mg tablets. It's also available as an injection. Then 50 milligram per ml injections. Then you can see Finargan is available even as a elixir for cough and all. So you can see it is containing 5 milligram per 5 ml oral solution. So Finargan is a very popular antihistaminic. Similarly, Avil and chlorpheniramine maleate are also very, very popular first generation antihistaminics. Now we'll move on to the second generation antihistaminic. So they were introduced much later than the first generation antihistaminics, only after 1980s. Now they are very special because they have got very high affinity for H1 receptor, and other than blocking the H1 receptor, they are having additional anti-allergic mechanisms, like they can block the leukotriene as well as the platelet activating factor, other mediators of inflammation and hypersensitivity like leukotrienes and PAF can also be inhibited by the second generation antihistaminics. Now, when compared to the first generation antihistaminics, they have very few adverse effects. That is, they do not have sedation, they do not have any CNS depressant property, they do not have anticholinergic side effects. Then there is no psychomotor impairment. That is, you can advise, you need not restrict driving, etc., when you are putting the patient on second generation antihistaminic. Then they also do not potentiate the CNS depressant drugs like benzodiazepines, alcohol. So first generation antihistaminics in general, they are CNS depressants. So if you give them along with other CNS depressants, they can cause addictive CNS depression. Now this is not seen with the second generation antihistaminic. So this is very important while prescribing a antihistaminic to a patient. Now, if you have an individual who is having a night duty and you have to prescribe him an antihistaminic, you have to prescribe him a second generation antihistaminic, because if you prescribe first generation, he is bound to feel asleep. Fall asleep. Similarly, if a person is driving heavy machinery, or he is a driver or a policeman who have to be alert and they have to be prescribed an antihistaminic, you have to go for a second generation antihistaminic and not a first generation antihistaminic. Now we look at the individual antihistaminics, second generation antihistaminics. The first second generation antihistaminic that was used was terfenadine. However, this is banned now because it caused very fatal arrhythmias, and these arrhythmias were called as torsidis de pointis, means they caused QT prolongation, and that occurred mainly when the terfenadine was administered with cytochrome P450 inhibitors like erythromycin or ketoconazole. This is a case of drug interaction. Now, whenever terfenadine was introduced or administered along with cytochrome P450 inhibitors like erythromycin, the metabolism of terfenadine was decreased. As a consequence, the level of terfenadine increased and it led to toxicity. The toxicity in this case was torsidis de pointis, and that was actually a fatal toxicity. Now, because of this drug has been banned from the market. Now, later on, we had astemizole coming into the market. Now, that also is banned for the same reason. It also caused torsidis de pointis when co-administered with CYP3A4 inhibitors like erythromycin, ketoconazole. Now, next came the fexofenadine. So, fexofenadine actually was the active metabolite of terfenadine. And the difference here was that it did not prolong the QT interval. That is, it is not causing any torsidis de pointis. That is mainly because it is an active metabolite. It need not have, it was not further metabolized. So there was no interaction with the CYP3A4 inhibitors. However, as a precautionary measure, this drug also is avoided in patients who are susceptible to QT prolongation or people who could go for arrhythmias or hypokalemia. So as a precautionary measure, it is avoided in such patients. But it is not seen to have any kind of QT prolongation experience, but we are taking a precaution with patients who are having a susceptibility for prolonged QT interval. Then comes this important drug, the most important one because it's one of the most commonly used SGA, cetirizine. So cetirizine is a metabolite of hydroxyzine. Hydroxyzine was the first generation antihistaminic. It is having marked affinity for peripheral H1 receptor. It is having additional anti-allergic mechanisms like inhibition of the platelet activating factor. It also has got a high and longer lasting concentration in the skin. So these are some of the very positive features of cetirizine. It penetrates brain very poorly, so it doesn't cause any kind of sedation. But sometimes mild sedation can be seen in some individuals. It is not metabolized, so there is no interactions with any of the CYP inhibitors. There is no arrhythmogenic risk also. T-half is 7 to 10 hours. And uses mainly, it is used for upper respiratory allergies, urticaria, pollinosis, atopic dermatitis, seasonal asthma, and it is administered at 10 milligram orally at bedtime. So this dose is also important. You have to remember it by heart that cetirizine is given at a dose of 10 milligram at bedtime. Then levocetirizine is the active R enantiomer of cetirizine, and it is effective at half the dose. That is, we can give it at 5 milligram at bedtime and produces the same effect that is produced by 10 milligram of cetirizine. It is comparatively, it is producing even less sedation and less side effects than cetirizine. Then we have got lollatadine, which is a very fast-acting SGA. It is long-acting because it is getting metabolized to another active metabolite, which is adding on to its THA. So it is fast acting as well as it is long acting, mainly because of its active metabolite. Desloratadine is the metabolite of loratadine and it is effective at half the dose of loratadine. Next comes the azolastine. The most peculiar feature of this is that it is an HGA with topical action. Topical action. It also inhibits the mediators like leukotrienes and platelet activating factor. And also it is preventing the expression of the intracellular adhesion molecule on the nasal mucosa because it is causing a down regulation of this molecule. It is used very rampantly in the seasonal and perennial rhinitis, and for this it is given by the intranasal route. Others are mesolastin. Again, they are also useful for rhinitis as well as urticaria. Avastin is also used for nasal and skin allergy, but it has got some amount of arrhythmogenic potential. Rupatadine is another SGA which is having an additional platelet activating factor antagonistic property, additional PAF antagonistic property. Again, it is indicated in allergic rhinitis. So you can see the second generation ones that I mentioned now are mainly for allergic rhinitis or for urticaria or for skin allergies and so on. Now, the final one, therapeutic uses once again of the second generation antihistaminics. They are used for allergic conditions like allergic rhinitis, conjunctivitis, hay fever, pollinosis, then skin conditions like urticaria, dermographism, atopic eczema, acute and allergic condition reactions to drugs and food. So mainly in and around the allergic conditions. But all those uses that we mentioned in first generation pertaining to the CNS actions is not there in the case of SGA. And also they are not having much of an antipyretic, anti-cold also it is not very useful because I told you they do not decrease the secretion. They also do not have any kind of anti-emetic action which we saw in the first generation antihistaminic. They are also not very good cough suppressants also. So these are the uses of SGAs. So in this chapter, you will learn the classification of antihistaminics, then the actions and areas of antihistaminics. Second generation antihistaminics, you can prepare as a short note where you will mention about the examples, then their advantages over the first generation ones, their individual compounds you can describe briefly, and finally you will end up with the therapeutic uses of SGAs. And cetirizine, you can prepare as a separate short note. So if you have any doubts, you can contact me after the session. Thank you.